Nobody likes to look like a fool, except for maybe actors who play the fool in King Lear. But when it comes to language learning, nothing puts you in your place faster than opening up your mouth and trying to speak. It's an ego crusher if your ego is too big. So how do we deal with this? How do we get the ego out of the way? And can using memory techniques as part of your language learning journey help? Well, they've certainly helped me, and we have research from doctors like Tim Dalgleish who show that memory techniques can help deal with depression, with PTSD, and part of it seems to be that as the dopamine increases in the brain and the opioid receptors start firing, you just feel better, and you don't necessarily get so hung up in your mind. But basically, it also gives you more confidence that having something memorized is something that you can bring forward. So when you memorize words and phrases, you're much more likely to have that confidence that you're going to be able to remember it. And then if you use memory training to practice, in addition to reading and writing and speaking and listening, as Benny says from day one, then you're going to be even more like a machine that just starts to naturally produce it, to put it out. But let's also look at this a slightly different way with a little bit of a story that still blows me away. Years ago, when I was first learning Chinese, I had some cool things happen. One of which was that I was invited on Shlomo Freund's China Business Cast. We were digging into how mnemonics for language learning works, and I gave him an example of how I memorized this phrase, Ni junbei hao le ma, which means like, are you ready? Now, my tones are not perfect, of course, and Jun can be like Juan, and it's like tone 3 and 4 and all that sort of stuff. He was like, that's great, but are you sure that's right? I've never heard it. Well, the best I could do right then and there was call a spade, not let my ego go crazy, and just admit that I might have memorized the phrase incorrectly, or my tones are not that great, yada, yada, yada. Turns out, when Shlomo recorded the interview, he said he was the one who had a lapse in his memory for Chinese, not me. And that was really vindicating because two things. I didn't freak out. I didn't know, necessarily. I was just learning Mandarin at that time and preparing to go to China. And also, these things happen. There's no point in freaking out. And of course, I have the benefit of continual memory training. So the dopamine is high, the myelin is high in the brain, and the opioid receptors are firing. So I just feel good, better than ever before. Memory training day after day after day. Whether you have those benefits or not yet, and I hope that you will devote yourself to learning memory techniques like the magnetic memory method, because it will help you feel better as you keep moving forward. But you can't allow yourself to get frustrated even if you're not benefiting from memory techniques, because there is no bottom to the well of speaking with people who will not understand you. Even in your mother tongue, people will misunderstand you and say, what? In Germany, I love to use the word Quittung, but people don't understand my fat old tongue for some reason, so I have to remind myself to use the word Rechnung instead. Now, theoretically, I should be able to use some kind of magnetic memory method wizardry to fix the phonic circuitry that's supposedly misfiring here. But from a confidence perspective, just having another way to say the same thing is better because, you can't always know what you're going to say or how you're going to say it. You can't know or predict who's going to understand what you've said. So your confidence and your courage can have a phalanx of possible ways to say the same thing. If you don't know that word, phalanx, it means a row of shields. So when soldiers get together and they all have their shields and they put them down together on the ground, they're much stronger than just one soldier with one shield. They can have such a situation that a bunch of soldiers have their spears just go whoo over top of them, and they even avoid being crushed underneath their shields because of that power of a phalanx. Having multiple words makes you stronger, helps you get to the correct thing that you want to say. Now, in the previous video in our series, I talked about exactly how to memorize new vocabulary and phrases quickly using proper mnemonics in a way that scales. Well, when navigating a language, there are also what you might call proper forms of inquiry. This involves applying your learning process to not only memorizing different ways of saying the same thing, but different questions that you can learn to ask in your target language. Commit those questions to memory. Questions like, what is an alternative way to say whatever it is you're trying to say. What's a better way to pronounce this word? Is there any cool slang, or are there any idioms that express this idea or question? Having a pool or a phalanx of questions like these can help you leap over any pools and puddles of embarrassment that might otherwise soil the shoes of your mind, and keep things moving. Also, you can start to learn about the context of various aspects of the language that can help keep things light and fun in your mind. So for example, I spent a lot of time in German immigration offices. So I started using the word Amtsdeutsch for the bureaucratic German that people in these offices use as a nice little joke to break the ice. This is different than the Kauderwelsch that you might hear in a Kneipe, or the gibberish people might speak in a bar. Just knowing these kinds of expressions, using them with native speakers, it opens them up to you. It makes them want to be more relaxed with you as you're speaking with them, and then they will teach you things that they might not teach you otherwise if you hadn't broken the ice first. It takes the heat off and puts you into the language itself at a deeper level. Now, another way to get your memory on your side for confidence and courage is to set up daily relaxation routines. Believe me, this has everything to do with language. I'm talking about meditation. I'm talking about deep breathing and stretching. Now, there are different kinds of meditation. Not all kinds are for all people. I just suggest that you experiment and explore. But generally, meditation is known to increase the size of the hippocampus, which is one of the reasons that it improves our memory. The hippocampus is deeply related to memory. Plus, meditation, breathing, yoga, it gets more oxygen through the brain, including the hippocampus. And so breathing and stretching, you're literally aerating your brain. Now, I recommend, look, I don't have a cult, I don't have a religion, maybe I have a bit of a philosophy to recommend, but just follow this through. There's some mantra memorization and recitation that can really help, because you can actually learn a language by memorizing them in Sanskrit. And so I use mnemonics to memorize over 1,700 words now of Sanskrit, and those words are arranged into mantras, long-form mantras. And I'm a real proponent of them, because even though some people have spiritual and whatnot kinds of things to say, I just see a kind of ancient cognitive behavior therapy in them. And if you've seen my TEDx talk, Chittameva Mahadosham, Chittameva Hi Balakaha, Chittameva Mahatmayam, Chittameva Mahanasat. Clearly not English, is it? You know that it really changed my life. A lot of the positivity and energy you're seeing now, yes, true, I still get grumbly and complain. Sometimes complain, like everybody does, right? But I just generally have a much more blissful experience of life. And what the mantras have helped me with is helping me realize that my thoughts are not real, right? In fact, one of the Sanskrit phrases says that it is more likely for a hare or a rabbit to have horns than for any thought going through the mind of a human to be real, right? And there are many, many Zen stories that you can commit to memory that help you to not take life so seriously. So I would suggest seeking these things out and then committing them to memory. And if you find yourself nonetheless taking life so seriously while you're working on your speaking practice and so forth, maybe you'll call some of this to mind, either out loud, or you'll just privately run it through your mind, and it'll take the heat off yet again, and you'll enjoy the present moment so much more. That hare with horns, will just suddenly make you laugh, and you'll say, I'm taking life too seriously. And if you missed part 2 of the series, I also share with you the story of Alexander the Great and Diogenes, and that's a simple little mantra in English that you can memorize that when you bring it to mind is also quite funny and can help you be back in the present moment and just enjoy it. Finally, when you're using the magnetic memory method, you can use it to memorize entire dialogues. You can find dialogues in books and videos, but I've found that it's really fun to memorize dialogues or parts of dialogue from interviews that I find on the internet. And it's really easy these days to just search up the word for interview in the language that you're learning, and then, find a musician that you admire, or an actor or actress, or, if you can stomach politicians, and then get their dialogues, see if you can get the, closed captions going, and so you can read them at the same time, and just memorize them either in part or in whole. And Tailor making your own set of dialogues based on actual speech, not textbook speech, gives you something to memorize that you can then use to avoid frustration. Because now you can pull out things that you've learned, that you've heard native speakers say. And this gives you more confidence because you're not just doing some pre-programmed textbook phrase, but you're using phrases that people actually use. And that flows even more because it's not formal writing in a book or even formal writing in a movie. Movie dialogue is not real. It's not how people actually speak. It has many false starts and stops, and people respond in super dramatic ways, and it doesn't really correspond to reality at all. You might even say that some of those things they say are as real as a rabbit with horns. And even then, you may still make mistakes with native speakers. They may even chastise you, or you're telling somebody else who's also studying the language, and they may think that you're wrong, like Shlomo did with me, but they're not realizing they're the ones who have been misled. They're the ones who are off the rocker. I've even had this in native languages in a couple of ways. So when I've learned German, I've had native speakers say, "Abgebaggert, what the heck is that?" And I have to pull out my German slang dictionary, and they say, "Yeah, well, they might use that over there in this Bundesland, but they sure as heck don't use it in mine." So, they won't even allow that it's a real word because it's used by the people over there. It's Plattdeutsch or whatever, right? It's Saarlandisch. Oh, heaven forbid that I would ever use that. They're just being judgmental, right? Forgive them, let it go. But at the end of the day, understand that native speakers don't know their language entirely. When I was passing level 3 in Mandarin, that teacher, he would not let me use the R ending that Beijingers used. If the word ended with N, it was pronounced with N, and he would correct me and correct me and correct me again and again and again, because he's from a particular part of China. They use the N ending, and he doesn't care who I'm married to. She uses the R ending. I don't care. Well, you just got to go with it. Relax. I don't judge him. I just use the art of memory. You can learn how to use the magnetic memory method to memorize all the endings that you want. Get deeply involved. You'll be much more dexterous on your feet. You'll keep moving forward. And when judgment comes from the world, which will come, it will come, believe me, it will come. Especially if you're a person like me working on the internet, you get judgments all the time. You got to learn how to roll with the punches, especially when you're learning a language. My favorite thing has just been to memorize vocabulary and phrases from the kinds of people I want to speak with, the kinds of people I want to share common experiences with. Mensch, as they say in German. So for this, again, I have found interviews with musicians, with philosophers, very, very useful. They're speaking about words and the world in their terms. And this provides me, and will provide you, with a level of authenticity that is impossible to get anywhere else. Even if the musician, as musicians often do, are posturing, it's still posturing in the context of rock and roll. Artists, filmmakers, authors, all these people, they tend to be a bit larger than life. So their attitudes and their confidence can rub off a little bit on you too. And all the more so when you're memorizing the vocabulary and the phrases that fuel their swagger. Now obviously, modesty beats muscle on the main, but never forget, what would language learning be without a bit of rock and roll? That would probably be a mistake.